In the heart of the night, this world were bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright, we will set it alight. In the heart of the night. Hello everyone, I am Anthropomantic Fiend and I do horror-related things on the internet. And today I am doing a review of Slumber Party Massacre 2. This is a review that was requested by James Moss. He also asked that I review the first Slumber Party Massacre, which I reviewed last week. But the point is, thank you, James Moss, for requesting that I do these. Slumber Party Massacre 2 is a film that came out in 1987. It was directed by Deborah Brock, who also directed Rock and Roll High School Forever, Andy Colby's Incredible Adventure, and Andy and the Airwave Ranger. And this film stars Crystal Bernard, who is in Chameleons, As Good as Dead, and shows such as Wings and It's a Living. I'm sorry, I can't see my notes that well with these sunglasses on, but this was my fashion choice for today, so I'm just gonna have to deal with it. Atanas Illich, who is in A Private Matter and Raging Cajun, and son of American entrepreneur who founded Little Caesars Pizza, Mike Illich. As a matter of fact, when you look him up on Google, the first thing that comes up is not the fact that he's an actor and he played the driller killer, it's the fact that he's the son of Mike Illich, which is a little bit sad. This film also stars Kimberly MacArthur, who was in Easy Money, Malibu Express, and Elvis and Me. And this film stars Patrick Lone, who is in Animal Rage and Junior. So this film follows the character of Courtney, who's the younger sister of Valerie from the first film. Valerie, due to the traumatic events of the first film, has been sent to a mental institution, and while Courtney seems to be coping a little bit better with the trauma, maybe because she wasn't as close to the people involved, she is still having horrible recurring nightmares about the events. But she's a lot older now, she's in high school, she's got a bunch of friends, all of whom are in a band together now, and they want to go away to this little retreat for the weekend to hang out and party and just practice as a band and songwrite. But as the gathering progresses, she is continuing to have recurring nightmares about the first Slumber Party Massacre, but she is also having nightmares of a strange killer who's similar to the killer from the first film, but has a guitar with a drill head attached to it, and who is killing her friends. So she is mentally not in a good place. She's trying to figure out what's real and what's not, because these dreams are becoming either real events or hallucinations that are affecting the waking world. And then somehow this driller killer from her nightmare manifests himself in reality, and her friends have to fight to survive yet another Slumber Party Massacre. So the score for this film was done by Richard Cox, who was hard to find because there are apparently a lot of Richard Coxes in the film industry that aren't this guy, but he also scored a movie called The American Scream and did additional music for a film called The Night Before, but that's it. And his score for this film is drastically different from the first movie's score, in that it's a lot more what I would expect from an 80s slasher. It's very synthy, and it's not as much of a juxtaposition, whereas the original score had this very gothic feel juxtaposed over suburbia. Here we've got these 80s synths that are very kind of laid back and pleasant in the more fun scenes, and then when things get dark, they will get amped up and darker and almost have like a synth rock feel, which is very fitting for what's going on in the film. We also get a lot of other music in the film. Because our main characters are a rock band, they're listening to a lot of stuff on the radio, and our killer this time, the driller killer, is a singing rock and roller with a weaponized guitar. We get to hear Courtney's band and all of their songs, which are really cool. There are some fun songs that are being played on the radio throughout the movie, and the songs that the Driller Killer sings are really fun as well. All of the music in this film was very enjoyable. Story-wise, I liked the way they managed to connect this film to the first film, because while the first movie is a little bit campy, it's a lot more grounded in gritty reality. It's a lot darker, whereas this film gets very surreal and very campy. But by having Valerie as a main character and having her kind of dreams and nightmares being the focal point of the film, that tonal shift really works. And the opening sequence of the film most prominently features some actual shots from the first Slumber Party Massacre in her flashbacks, which was just a nice little thread to the original film to sort of fill you in on who this character is and what all we're looking at now. And like in the original film, there's still some unnecessary nudity, thanks to, I think it was Trenchy, the Soulless Trenchcoat, who let me know that this was a Roger Corman production, so being in the exploitation film business, he wanted nudity added to sell it, so that's probably his doing here again. But in this film, it is far less. There's maybe one topless shot in the whole film, and I feel like the actress in the scene was having a little bit more fun with it. It doesn't feel as much like we're prying into something we're not supposed to see, because she's in front of all of her friends, she's having fun. It's not an erotic thing in any way. It may have been uncomfortable. It was probably at least a little bit uncomfortable, but again, it's not a thing that adds or detracts to the film for me. It's just interesting to me. And all of the just hangout and partying of the teens felt a little bit more natural to me. Maybe because it wasn't supposed to be like a stereotypical slumber party. In the first movie, the title is Slumber Party Massacre, and I was like, I'm expecting party games and stuff, which we never get. In this, it's still Slumber Party Massacre 2, and they refer to what they're doing as a slumber party, but it feels like it was always intended just to be some friends getting away and hanging out and working on music, which is what they do. They just kind of goof around and chat, and they play music. Even though things are a little bit artificial and cheesy and overdone compared to how real people would probably interact, it felt like these people had very natural chemistry. It just felt like they were hanging out, and I enjoyed that overall vibe. And once the other shoe drops and the Driller Killer becomes manifest, while there's really no logical reason for the Driller Killer to now be here, we've just seen Courtney dreaming about him up until now, and now suddenly he's real and killing people. We don't know where he came from, except possibly out of her head. Why is he suddenly tangible now? Who knows? But it really works for me, even though the ending, without spoiling things, makes it a bit more ambiguous in terms of what's actually real in this film. Even if that wasn't there, I would be fine with just the Driller Killer suddenly being real, because for whatever reason, given the tone of the film, it kind of works. And I think he also works as a metaphor for the way trauma never really goes away and can continue to hurt people long after the events of whatever traumatic event occurred, because he's kind of like this ridiculous cartoon version of the drill-wielding killer from the first Slumber Party Massacre. You could see this as Courtney's brain taking this traumatic event that happened to her when it was really young, and her mind really kind of heightening it and exaggerating it and kind of juxtaposing it with one of the biggest parts of her life at the moment, which is music and rock and roll. Rock and roll never dies, as the Driller Killer says in the film. Trauma doesn't either. The scare sequences in this film aren't tense and scary and legitimately dark the way they are in the first film, because it's this super hammy, over-the-top rock and roll Driller Killer going around singing and rocking out as he kills these people, and it's really over-the-top and ridiculous. But those scenes really work for me, because the Driller Killer is just completely hamming it up. He's super ridiculous and fun to watch, but all of our protagonists and would-be victims are playing it completely straight, as if this guy was the killer from the first movie, and he wasn't singing and dancing in front of them. They're just trying to get away and survive. It feels tonally weird. You don't know how you're supposed to feel during this scene, but somehow it's very fun to see this guy just being ridiculous while also worrying about the fate of the protagonist. They are able to balance those two things, at least in my eyes, which I found kind of impressive. The ending kind of lends this whole ambiguity to the story again. It's a little bit of a letdown to me, but I'm not entirely sure what even happened there. If that ending didn't happen and it was just like, yup, there's no two ways about it, suddenly the driller killer is a real person, we're not sure why, that would work for me. Still, you're kind of already having to suspend your disbelief anyway, just because of the whole cheesy tone of the film, so just having this inexplicable weird blurring of dream and reality would actually be really cool, and that's still kind of happening. But if that ending did not happen, I would also be fine. In terms of characters, I think Crystal Bernard does a fantastic job of channeling what Jennifer Myers created with the character of Courtney in the first film, while also creating an older, more mature version of her. As soon as she was on screen and she was having these flashbacks and I was like, oh, this is supposed to be a character from the first film, I immediately knew what character it was supposed to be, even though it's a completely different actress. She really channels the vibe of Courtney in the first movie while still bringing her own thing to it, which was really, really cool. I really liked the way they kind of understated her trauma, at least at first in the film, because as the film progresses, her trauma, or, you know, the thing I'm seeing as a metaphor for her trauma, which is the driller killer, becomes this really huge part of everything. But at first in the film, she's having these nightmares, but she's really, really quiet and really reserved and not really freaking out about much of anything. But then she accidentally drops a plate on the floor and then she just has this little breakdown and it's heartbreaking. And there are little moments like that that kind of escalate throughout the film, and it's very overwrought towards the end, but that's kind of where the movie is at that point. And before everything's just in ridiculous rock and roll nightmare land by the end, the more subtle kind of hints at just how hard the horror of everything hit her at the beginning were pretty well done, in my opinion. I also love the fact that our main characters are now in a band. In the first film, these were just a bunch of people who went to high school together. In some ways, it felt a little bit contrived. Actually, that's not true. They were all pretty much on the same basketball team, it seemed like. Maybe it's just that I'm more of the music world than the sports world, but I was able to connect with these characters a little bit more. The characters in the first movie are likable, but they also seemed to have this little bit of animosity towards each other that was kind of playful, but also kind of cruel. In this movie, they're still kind of poking at each other, but there seems to be a lot more warmth and genuine chemistry between all of them. I also just found the bonding over music thing a lot more relatable just to me personally, so that helped, I think. I can't say I was able to tell apart most of the girls. Courtney's got a whole thing going on. She's the focal point of the film, so I knew when it was Courtney. And there are a few other girls who have just specific character traits, but I couldn't really pick them out. The only other one I could really single out was Sally, and that's because of a thing that I was kind of iffy on, which is her being all about her appearance throughout the film. She is obsessed with her face. She's freaking out about possible pimples and zits that she can like feel that haven't even appeared yet. It kind of felt a little bit like this ultra girly stereotype, but she's also, again, a fun and likable character, so didn't really bother me. It was a bit much. The few guys that come along to the party as well are a lot like the guys in the first film in that they're sort of likable, but they're also kind of douchey, and they're total peeping toms. Once again, the one scene that we get with nudity in this film is one where they're spying through the window, like in the first movie, which was... But ironically, my favorite of the guys in the film is the one that is just the douchiest total meathead of all of them, which is TJ. He's just got this whole ridiculous vibe to him. His mind is just always on sex, and he's just got this little doofy laugh and this deep voice, and he's just this total caricature of a character. When horrible stuff starts happening, he becomes a bit more sympathetic and we see a nice side of him. But again, he's kind of just a lovable, meat-headed douchebag from the beginning. He's not someone I would want to hang out with in real life, but how far they push his meatheadedness was very enjoyable. And then we come to the driller killer, who is just wild. Again, it's kind of taking the template of the guy with the really big drill from the first movie and kind of crossing that with like this 50s Elvis greaser persona on steroids and probably also acid. He's got big Elvis hair, this big jacket with the collar turned up, and these biker gloves, and he's always smoking cigarettes. He's got the drill guitar, and he is just so much fun to watch. He is way too much all the time, and that's why he's the best. His dialogue is a little bit reminiscent of some of the stuff that the killer says in the first film, but kind of filtered through this kind of sleazy rocker vibe. And then we've got these little one-liners from him that are just lines from classic rock songs put into different context, which is just the best. But again, he also works as this great sort of nightmare version of the first movie's killer and this embodiment of Courtney's trauma. In terms of just tone, this super campy, really fun to watch killer shouldn't work when you're rooting for all of the victims. Because I'm not gonna lie, I think the driller killer is really cool. I kind of want to dress as him for Halloween at some point, but also I think he falls into the same category as, say, Freddy Krueger or Chucky, especially in the earlier installments of those franchises, because I have a ball watching those characters spit off one-liners and come up with these ridiculous creative kill sequences, but I don't want them to win because I like the main characters in those films too much for that to happen. Granted, the driller killer is way more over the top than Chucky or Freddy Krueger are at all, especially in terms of the earlier installments of those franchises, but I'm able to enjoy just how over the top he is without wanting him to win. Similar vibe to Beetlejuice and Beetlejuice. He's a really fun animated character to watch, but he's a total pervert, and if he was the hero of the movie, I would have some problems with that. And speaking of Freddy Krueger, we get some fun character names in this. There are a few useless cops who show up at one point. We have Officer Krueger and Officer Voorhees, who were fun. We find out that Valerie and Courtney's family name is Bates, which might be a Psycho reference, but it could also just be the name they picked. Bates is not an uncommon name. I forget what the context is, but the name Craven is dropped at one point in the film. And there's, of course, the best character name in the whole movie, which is Mr. Damn Kids. And Mr. Damn Kids is just this one guy. I think he's like a film producer that they got for this one shot in the film, who just hears a noise, comes out of his front door, and it's just like, those damn kids. And he shuts the door, and we never see him again. But he is credited at the end of the film as Mr. Damn Kids. His last name is the words damn and kids as one word, and I can't get over how great that is. In keeping with pretty much everything I've said up until this point, the movie's whole aesthetic is this really heightened version of what we see in the first film. I really like a lot of the editing in terms of especially the early dream and nightmare sequences we see from Courtney, because they're just crazy montages of shots of some things that have already happened and a lot of things that haven't happened yet, so you don't have context for them, but they are just composed in a really interesting, aesthetically pleasing way. And of course, you've got the guitar drill, which is just probably one of the most iconic, distinctive horror weapons out there. I wouldn't call a movie like Slumber Party Massacre 2 as iconic as anything like Halloween or Friday the 13th, but the weapons of characters like Jason and Michael are not as distinctive as something like the drill guitar. I would almost put this on par in terms of iconic weapons with Freddy's glove in A Nightmare on Elm Street or the Sentinel spheres from the Phantasm movies, in that you can take that weapon out of context and know exactly what movie it's from if you're a horror aficionado. Effects-wise, I think this movie is a slight level up in terms of practical effects from the first movie. We've got a lot of decent but cheesy gore effects again, a lot of limbs, lots and lots of blood. Also some just weird practical effects in terms of some of the weird visions that Courtney has. There's a scene where something happens to somebody's face that's really gross. There's a scene where a chicken from the fridge comes to life and it feels like something out of Poltergeist that doesn't belong in this movie, but it's really, really enjoyable. So all in all, I like this movie a lot more than the first Slumber Party Massacre. It definitely helps to have seen the first film to have context, and I think it is a natural progression from what we get in the first film, but I like the characters more, I like the overall rock and roll vibe a lot more, and it is just a lot more fun, all in all. So if you're a fan of fun, very campy slashers, especially if you like your slashers dark and serious, you're probably gonna like the first film a little bit more than this. But if you like your slashers ridiculous and wacky and with spontaneous 50s style rock and roll numbers, this is absolutely the movie for you, and it was very much the movie for me. That is my review of Slumber Party Massacre 2. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye.